when they found the child's t-shirt soaked, torn hanging from a blackberry bush at the edge of the old Laramida Park. Eli Whitaker had already been lying still for nearly half an hour. The dawn's dew hadn't managed to wash away the dried blood between his fingers, nor the purple welts across his back, as if someone had tried to beat his name off the face of the earth. The woman weeping outside the hospital at sunrise, Delilah Knox, claimed the boy had gone missing. That he'd run off after a tantrum, that she'd searched for him like a madwoman, that she hadn't heard from him since. But no one asked why there was a brown stain under the cuff of her blouse, or why her eyes didn't flicker when she said, "My stepson." There were no witnesses. The park's cameras had been broken since winter. The municipal guard had fallen, asleep in his car listening to sad ballads. Only one soul rose that exact night, an old dog named Remus, a retired canine who had once served on the southern border, sniffing out fear, gunpowder, and lies. Now he lived among the neglected graves in the neighborhood cemetery, slept beside the niche of a nameless child, and growled in his dreams whenever the wind carried a certain bitter scent. That morning the air changed. The smell hit him like a voiceless scream, sour sweat, young blood, the damp fear of a child who knew no one was coming. Remus stood up with effort. His aging hips cracked. His one remaining ear twitched, and without barking, he began to walk. He found the boy in a clearing of the park, where children once broke pinatas on St. Day, and now only silence grew. Eli Whitaker was lying face down, one leg twisted in a way that didn't seem natural, his face buried in the roots of a bald cypress tree. He wasn't crying, he wasn't speaking. He just trembled slowly like a sick bird that hasn't yet accepted the end. Remus approached without a sound, sniffed the dirt, then the body. He pressed his muzzle to the back of the boy's neck, felt a heartbeat, faint, stubbornly human. Then the dog did something he hadn't done since his patrol partner died. He whimpered, not like an animal, but like a man who remembers. He grabbed the child's sweater in his teeth, pulled. Eli Whitaker didn't react. Pulled again, nothing. Only when his rough tongue touched the boy's cheek, leaving a trail of saliva and memory, did Eli Whitaker move a hand, barely raised it, then let it fall on Remus's neck, as if he had been waiting for that exact skin, that warmth, that loyalty. At 5:12 a.m., Miss Ida May, the florist who lived across from the cemetery, heard barking, low, dry, not alarm, but plea. She opened her door wrapped in her shawl, swollen feet planted firm, heart lit like a lantern. And she saw them, a filthy old dog dragging a half-dead child wrapped in leaves. "Holy Virgin," she whispered. Without another word, she called Clara Jimenez, the social worker she knew from a case months ago, the one who saved a girl no one else would. Clara arrived before the ambulance. She knelt silently, saw the marks, the bruises, the blood-caked fingers, and the way the boy, even unconscious, wouldn't let go of the dog's fur. "Who did this to you, little one?" she whispered. Eli Whitaker didn't answer, but the dog gave a low growl, as if he knew the answer, but had no human way to say it. At the hospital, Nurse Evelyn allowed Remus to stay in the waiting room, even though rules forbid it. "That dog didn't come to visit," she said. "He came to stay, and he did, day after day, night after night. No food, no sleep. Only his eyes locked on the ICU door, waiting for the boy to open his." Whenever Delilah arrived perfumed, groomed, crying in front of the cameras, Remus grew tense. He never barked. He simply stood between her and the door, as if to say, "Not." One step closer. Delilah smiled with her lips, but her eyes were knives. "That dog's sick. They should put it down. It's useless now." But Clara looked at him and replied calmly, "Sometimes what the world calls useless is the only thing that still knows the truth." A week later, Eli Whitaker woke up. He didn't speak. He didn't ask. He didn't cry. He just reached out with his hand. He touched a furry ear and smiled. Remus, feeling it, wagged his tail for the first time in years. And in that white hospital room where so many secrets had died, a truth was born in silence. The beast that does not forget is also the one that protects. And the boy's hand never let go of that gray neck again. Never. The mist had not yet fully lifted when Remus reached the edge of the abandoned park. That place where laughter had died out years ago, and only rusty swings and broken bottles remained. The air smelled of damp earth, of metal, of something else. Something not of this world. A thick, salty scent between blood and fear. The dog stopped. His wounded paw trembled slightly, but he did not give in. He sniffed with the precision of old memory, turned his head toward the withered rosebush, toward a moss-covered bench, and then he saw him. Eli Whitaker's small body lay among the twisted roots of a wild laurel. One shoe off to the side, his shirt torn, a dark stain spreading beneath. His head, he wasn't moving. Remus didn't bark. It wasn't the time for noise. It was the time to remember who he had been. A canine, a four-legged soldier, a partner. He approached slowly, as if each leaf beneath his paw might snap the last thread of life holding the boy. He sniffed his neck, just a wisp of air, a short gasp, like the last breath of a dream that doesn't want to end. Remus licked Eli Whitaker's cheek, dirty, cold, unresponsive. But the boy did something. His fingers moved. Just a tremor, almost invisible. And then, as if brushing against a memory, his hand closed around the dog's ear, not tightly, not with fear, but with an ancient gesture, that of holding onto the one thing that hasn't betrayed you. You're not her. Eli Whitaker murmured, eyes still closed. Remus whimpered, barely audible. The breeze carried a voice that was not breeze. Eli Whitaker, where are you, ungrateful child? Delilah. The voice of burnt sugar, of poison disguised as a hug. She was close. She was searching, but not to find. To make sure he was dead, Remus knew, not with words, with scent, with the tension in his aging muscles. Eli Whitaker trembled when he heard her. His body, wounded and weak, curled up like an orphaned pup. No, please, no more water, no more cold. He whispered. Remus did not move. He only turned his head toward the sound of footsteps. His cloudy eyes, veiled with the haze of those who have seen too much, lit up like embers, and he waited. Delilah didn't see him. She passed just a few meters away, pretending to call out, pretending to search. Oh my God, where have you gone, you cursed child? Your father would be ashamed of you. Remus growled, low, to the ground, like a muffled thunder deep in the chest. Eli Whitaker held on tighter. His lips were bleeding, but he didn't cry. He never cried in front of her. When the footsteps faded, Remus looked up at the sky. Gray still, as if the day itself refused to bear witness. Then, as one makes a decision that had already been made, Remus stood, positioned himself beside the boy, slid his body under the small torso, and began to drag him, slowly, inch by inch. Neck taut, teeth clenched on the damp fabric. Life hurt, but duty weighed more. The journey to Miss Ida May's cabin took 20 minutes. Let me know if you'd like this formatted as a short story or adapted for another purpose, or maybe 20 centuries. Upon arrival, Remus collapsed, not from surrender, from fulfillment. Eli Whitaker, his face buried against the dog's chest, no longer trembled. Not because he wasn't afraid, but because he was no longer alone. Camila, old and blind in one eye, came out when she heard the sound at the door. Who's there? The dog whimpered. Just once. The old woman understood. Remus. What are you carrying, creature? She knelt down as best she could. Her fingers touched the child's icy skin. Holy Virgin, he's alive, he's alive. She called emergency services, called Clara, called everyone who still had a soul. Before they took him away, Eli Whitaker barely opened his eyes. He didn't look at the nurse. He didn't look at the ambulance, only at the dog. You came back, ... he murmured, and Remus simply closed his eyes, as if to say, I promised. When the ambulance drove off and dust covered the gravel road, the dog stayed by the door, alone, old, bleeding from the ear, but with something new in his breath, peace, not from victory, but from arriving in time. Just once, one more time, one last time. The morning light barely slipped through the slits of the metal blind, filtering like sighs across the hospital's gray sheets. Eli Whitaker didn't move. His small body looked even more fragile amid the tubes, needles, and marks. That didn't come from the accident Delilah had reported. They came from before, long before. From a darkness not measured in nights, but in years of imposed silence. Remus was there, sitting by the closed door, his paw bandaged from the wound he got escaping the cage they'd tied him in. No one knew how he'd made it back to the hospital. They only knew that since the boy arrived, he hadn't left. Delilah arrived late. She smelled of cheap perfume and lies. She stood beside the bed with a bunch of plastic flowers and an expression that couldn't quite mask the ice in her gaze. Eli Whitaker, my love, what have you done this time? She whispered sweetly, like poison. I've told you 1,000 times. Don't run off, don't hide. You make me look like a negligent mother. Is that what you want? Remus let out a low growl. No one heard it, but Eli Whitaker did. And for the first time, his eyelids twitched. Clara noticed. She was on the other side of the glass, watching as always, without intervening, without interrupting. She knew something in the child's body reacted differently whenever that woman entered. It was as if the air itself grew heavy, as if the silence thickened, as if even hope held its breath. She spoke to him like nothing happened, whispered Nurse Evelyn, bringing the night shift report. As if the boy were guilty for being broken. Clara nodded with quiet rage. What worries me most is that Eli Whitaker hasn't cried. Not a single tear, not even when he woke up. He woke up 2 nights later, not with a scream, not with a call. He woke with a faint sigh, as if apologizing for still being alive. And the first thing he saw was Remus lying beside the stretcher, head on his paws and eyes open, alert. Eli Whitaker said nothing, but he reached out his hand, a trembling hand with bandaged fingers, moving through the air like someone crossing an abyss. And Remus stood up slowly, as if he knew that every inch mattered. He placed his muzzle under that hand. He didn't lick, he didn't bark. He was just there. And Eli Whitaker closed his eyes again, this time to rest, not to disappear. Delilah returned 3 days later, this time without flowers, without makeup, impatient. When is he being discharged? I can't miss any more work, she said, looking at her phone. The boy's fine now, right? Clara entered just then. She carried the sketchbook Noah had brought that morning, drawings Eli Whitaker had made months earlier at the shelter. Mrs. Barrigan, Clara said firmly. Do you recognize this? Delilah glanced at the drawings without interest. Crooked houses, a woman with long hair and a belt in her hand. A boy with no eyes. I don't know, what's that supposed to mean? Kids always draw weird stuff. Clara knelt next to Eli Whitaker, who was awake. She opened the notebook too. The page marked with a red ribbon. The boy looked. He said nothing, but his hand, slow and certain, pointed with a finger. Not at the drawing, at Delilah. Delilah stepped back. This is absurd. He's confused. I take care of him. I feed him. Eli Whitaker sat up abruptly. The monitors beeped. Evelyn rushed in from the hallway. Remus shot to his feet, growling, with his back arched. And finally, Ellie Whitaker's voice broke the air. "You don't take care of me. You extinguish me." Delilah was speechless, as if those words were knives in her throat. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't an accusation. It was the truth, spoken like someone blowing out a candle that should never have been lit. That night, Eli Whitaker asked to sleep with the door slightly open. Remus stayed outside as always. But when everyone was asleep, the boy climbed out of bed, dragging the four-pole, as if dragging years of silence. He opened the door, sat on the cold floor next to Remus. He said nothing, but he stayed with him, as if he knew that warmth doesn't always come from blankets. Sometimes it comes from a still body, one that doesn't need to speak to promise it won't leave. The next morning, Eli Whitaker asked for paper, not to write, to draw. He drew a dog with a scar. He drew a boy with a bandage. He drew a house without windows. And then, beside it, another house with flowers at the door. Clara saw them from the doorway. She didn't interrupt. She just murmured to herself, her voice trembling like a prayer. "Thank you for staying, Remus. Thank you for teaching us to look where no one wanted to see." The sun had not yet risen when Dr. Leon Bass closed the door to room 213. In his hands he held a file thin, but heavy enough to make his heart feel like lead. Behind him, the boy was still asleep, Eli Whitaker, 9 years old, silent like a stone sunk in a dark river. In the dim corridor, Nurse Evelyn was waiting, her eyes heavy with a sleepless night. "Well," she whispered. Leon shook his head, not for lack of answers, but because of an excess of unanswered questions. "He has old scars on his back," he finally said. "On his thighs, his arms. Burns, probably from cigarettes. And something else, a mark around his wrist. As if he'd been tied up." Evelyn pressed her lips together. "But his stepmother says he fell off a bike." Leon looked up. "A bike doesn't do that, Evelyn. Nor does it cause the fear I saw in his pupils when I turned on the light." At that moment, a soft rhythmic sound broke the silence. Slow steps, almost ceremonial. It was Remus. The canine dog walked as if he had spent decades in that hallway, as if the floor knew his footprints. He stopped in front of room 213, sat down, and stayed there, as if guarding a secret no one else deserved to break. Evelyn lowered her voice. "Since he arrived, he hasn't moved. Not when the police came. Not when she came in." "The woman?" "Yes, Delilah. She approached the boy's bed and he shrank back. He didn't scream. He didn't cry. He just closed his eyes." "But," Remus growled, low, deep, as if he had recognized the scent of fear. Len swallowed hard. He remembered something his grandmother used to say when he was a child. "Dogs always know who should never be let back in." Hours later, Delilah Knox returned. She brought a bag of cookies she had no intention of leaving behind. Her makeup was flawless, her smile too. "How's my stepson doing?" she asked sweetly. Evelyn looked at her without answering. She simply turned and pretended to check a tray. Delilah walked in without asking permission. Remus stood up. He didn't bark. He didn't attack. He simply walked toward her and blocked her path. "Move," Delilah said. "I'm not going to touch him. I just want to see him." Eli Whitaker opened his eyes. He didn't speak. He just watched from the bed with the look of someone waiting for the blow before they dare breathe. Delilah leaned in. She feigned tenderness. "Your mom brought you this," she said, placing the cookies on the bedside table. Eli Whitaker didn't reach for them. His fingers clutched the blanket. Then Remus approached, rested his head on Eli Whitaker's leg, and looked up at him. It was in that moment that Eli Whitaker whispered his first word since he was found. Barely a thread of sound. Barely air. Remus ... Delilah stepped back. "This is ridiculous," she said sharply. "A stray dog doesn't get to decide who can see a child." "But the child can," Evelyn replied firmly. That night, Clara Jimenez reviewed the medical photographs. In her small apartment, she had seen hundreds of cases. Marks from belts, straps, cables, but never a pattern like this. She took a sheet of paper and mapped out each scar. Line by line, she connected the points. The result wasn't accidental. It was a map of torture. She lit a candle before an image of the Virgin of Guadalupe. She didn't pray. She just closed her eyes. "Don't let me stay silent, even if no one wants to listen." The next day, Commissioner Cormack stormed into the hospital. "Where's the medical report?" "There's no authorization yet," said Eicher. "Well, there will be. This case is closed. It was an accident." From the back, Evelyn murmured, "And the scars?" Cormack turned slowly. "Not all scars are proof of a crime. Some are just part of growing up in a tough world," Remus growled. "Not at the tone, at the scent, at the lie." Cormack looked at the dog. "And what do you know?" "You're just an old dog." Remus didn't answer. But his eyes were two embers holding memories no one dared ask about. That afternoon, Eli Whitaker received a visit from his teacher, Silas Reeve. She brought a box of crayons. "They told me you used to draw," she said. Eli Whitaker didn't respond. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to," she added. "Sometimes silence how to paint too." The boy looked up. He picked up a blue crayon and began. First, a park. Then, a female figure in a red dress. In her hand, a rope. Behind her, a shadow with pointed ears. It had no mouth, only eyes. The last thing he drew was a heart, broken, and next to it, a name, Remus. That night, as the hospital lights turned off one by one, Clara returned to room 213. Eli Whitaker was asleep, but his hand rested on the dog's warm back. Remus was not asleep. He stood watch, like someone who had sworn never to fail again. Clara approached, lowered her voice. "Thank you." Remus turned his head. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. And in that tone, there was something that neither the law, nor the reports, nor the doctors had been able to give. The promise that someone, finally, had listened. 3 weeks had passed since that night. The night Eli Whitaker was found in the damp shadows of the abandoned park, with his flesh torn and his soul silent. Since then, he hadn't spoken a word, but he drew. Every morning, with the same dull-tipped pencil that Nurse Evelyn had left on his tray, Eli Whitaker traced figures. He didn't ask for paper. He didn't ask for anyone. He just drew. Silas Reeve, his art teacher, came to the center wearing the same linen coat he'd worn for years, carrying an old notebook under his arm. No one had asked him to come. He just felt he had to. Eli Whitaker didn't look up when he saw him, but his hand, the one that still trembled at the touch of metal, stopped moving. "Hello, Eli Whitaker," said Silas, sitting beside him without asking for permission. "Can I take a look?" The boy didn't answer, but turned the paper toward him. It was a female figure, hair pulled back, jaw clenched, red dress, in her hand a rope. Remus, the dog, was lying at the foot of the bed. When he saw the drawing, he let out a low growl, not of threat, of recognition. "I remember her too," Silas whispered, not to the boy, but to the dog. Clara, who was watching from the doorway, stepped forward. "Do you recognize her?" she asked quietly. "Not by name," the teacher replied, "but by the smell of something one tries to forget." That afternoon, Eli Whitaker made another drawing. This time smaller, just a few Maggie. A house with no windows. A kneeling silhouette. A standing figure holding a rod. And Remus, always Remus, behind the boy, facing danger. When Grace, the young security intern, saw it, her eyes welled up. That's the park shed. She murmured. It looks exactly like I remember it in the recording. The one that disappeared from the system, Clara added, without looking at anyone. Right after you uploaded it, Grace nodded silently. At the school, other children began to speak. First was Rose, her voice shaky and her nails bitten down to the flesh. She used to tell me, bad girls wash with ice. She made me put my hands in freezing water until I couldn't move my fingers anymore. Who? Clara asked gently, not pressing. Rose pointed to one of Eli Whitaker's drawings. The woman in the red dress. Her, she whispered. Delilah. The next day, Silas suggested an idea. Let the children draw. Don't tell them what to draw. Just ask them to draw something they remember when they're sad. Clara hesitated, but she agreed. 27 drawings. 12 showed female figures, with red skirts or arms stretched like whips. 5 included Remus, unnamed, but marked by the white patch on his back. Always next to the boy, always facing someone bigger. Just one showed a figure crying on the ground. Beside it, a sentence written with effort, I didn't want to die. It was Eli Whitaker's handwriting. That night, Clara stayed alone with him. She brought him pan de muerto and hot chocolate. It was November 1st. Eli Whitaker didn't eat, but he accepted the scent. Remus rested his head on the boy's lap. Both stared at the window. Outside, the candles on the family altars flickered as if someone were sighing from the other side. Clara dared to ask, does it hurt a lot to remember? Eli Whitaker didn't respond, but he picked up the pencil. And in the corner of the paper, he wrote, it hurts more to stay silent. Clara closed her eyes. She felt the sting of tears she didn't want to let fall. Then don't keep it inside anymore, son. Not while I'm here. In the common room, Grace stuck all the drawings on the wall, one by one, not as evidence, but as an altar, so they can be seen. So someone someday might really look at them. Delilah passed by that afternoon. She was carrying flowers, white ones. Expensive, the kind with no fragrance. When she saw the drawings, she smiled without opening her mouth. How creative. These children are, always making up tragedies. Remus stood up, growled, took a step toward her. And for the first time, Eli Whitaker held him back. Not to stop him, but to say, I'm with you. That night, Silas wrote in his notebook, children don't lie with crayons. If they draw monsters with their mother's face, it's because they saw them. If they draw a dog with wings, it's because someone saved their life. The first step toward truth wasn't a word. It was a stroke, a trembling line, a shadow between two figures, a rope in the hand of someone who claimed to love, a dog that couldn't look the other way. And, in the middle of all that, a child who, without saying it, was screaming through his drawings, I'm still here. The sky hung leaden over San Martin, as if the afternoon had decided to fall silent along with all those who knew, and said nothing. Rose was 11, but her eyes remembered nothing of what childhood was supposed to be. Sitting on the edge of the shelter's yard, with her elbows on her bony knees, and her hair tied back as if not even the wind was allowed to touch her neck, she watched Remus. The dog was there, still, just a few steps away, as if waiting for her permission to come closer, as if he already knew there was something between them no one else could see. Clara stopped a short distance away. She said nothing. The social worker had learned, through the years and her own wounds, that there are truths you can't pull out. You have to wait for them, like you wait for the sun to return after the dead. Rose brushed the ground with the tip of her shoe. I used to sleep in that room too, she murmured. The one with the bars on the window. The one that smells like gas when it rains. Remus raised an ear. He didn't come closer. He didn't leave. He waited. Mrs. Delilah, she said bad children bring the devil into the house. That if you didn't behave, The devil would come and crawl into your skin. Rose swallowed hard. She made me kneel on raw rice, and then, with the belt, she said, it was out of love. Pain cleanses disobedience, she would yell at me. Clara took a step, just one. Just enough for Rose to know she wasn't alone, that someone was listening, even if it hurt. The night I ran away, my back was so broken I couldn't feel my feet. Rose looked up. She wasn't crying. But that wasn't the worst part. She paused. The air smelled of wet clothes, earth, and fear that hadn't yet completely gone. The worst part was seeing the way she looked at him, she said. At Eli Whitaker. She looked at him like it was his fault for breathing. Then Remus got up. He walked over with a slowness full of respect. He wasn't seeking affection. He wasn't demanding attention. He simply sat beside Rose and let his body touch hers. Rose didn't move away. He didn't scream. When she hit him that last time, he didn't scream. I saw from the half-open door. He had blood at the corner of his mouth, and still he looked at her with those eyes of his like asking what he'd done wrong. That hurt more than the blows, because he still wanted to understand her. Rose's voice didn't tremble. It was a voice that had already said everything 1,000 times inside, on nights when sleep was a minefield. Clara took another step, crouched down, and sat in front of her, not to question, not to write, just to be there. Why didn't you say anything before, Rose? She asked in a voice so soft it blended with the air. Rose pressed her lips together. Because no one believed me when I told my story. Because Mrs. Delilah brought cookies to church and dressed like the virgins on the altars. Because when a little girl says she's afraid of a pretty woman, adults smile and say she's exaggerating. Silence fell, long, with a taste of ashes. And now? Rose looked at Remus. Now someone else knows. He knows. Clara followed her gaze. Remus held her without moving a muscle. There was something in that animal that was more than memory. It was judgment. It was loyalty made flesh and scars. I don't want revenge, Rose said. I just want someone to tell Eli Whitaker that I saw, that I know, that he wasn't alone. Clara nodded. Not like someone who promises justice, because the law already did that, for better or worse, but like someone who promises remembrance. He'll know, Rose. I swear it to you, for those who never got to speak. Then, for the first time, in a long while, Rose did something no one expected. She raised her hand and let it fall gently onto Remus's back. It was a small gesture, but the dog accepted it as a pact. A shared vow of silence, of crossed scars, and of souls that, though broken, still recognize each other. From the shelter's threshold, Signora Camilla watched with crossed arms. Her eyes, worn more by the years than by sight, were moist. She whispered a prayer to the Virgin of Guadalupe and let the wind carry half of it away. Oh God, let those who have something to say never be silenced again, she murmured. And that day, when the sun finally broke through the sky like a belated forgiveness, Clara knew something had changed. Because a broken girl spoke, because a dog listened again, and because in a place where everything had been fear, finally, someone chose to stay. The afternoon sun did not warm. It only lit up the silences. Grace Taylor held the small SD card as if it were a reliquary. Her fingers trembled. From the guard booth, the old park of San Blais seemed to sleep under a veil of abandonment. No creaking swings, no children's voices, only dry branches and the memory of something terrible. She had reviewed the recordings 3 times. At minute 2:13 a.m., a female figure could be seen thin, trembling, dragging something wrapped in a dark sheet. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She walked with a coldness that chilled the image. Grace closed her eyes. The child was Eli Whitaker, and the woman was undoubtedly Delilah. She clenched her teeth. She had to take this to Clara. Where did you get it? Clara whispered, not yet touching the device. I installed a camera on my own. For my thesis. It wasn't supposed to be there. Then it might not last long, Clara said, mostly to herself. I know. The two women looked at each other. Outside, the dog Remus had lain down beneath the concrete bench, panting under the heat. He seemed asleep, but his ears turned with every noise, every shadow. From the moment Eli Whitaker had been found, he hadn't left his side for even a second. Do you think it'll work as evidence? Grace asked. It will. Until someone decides it shouldn't. At 8:47 the next morning, Clara handed the evidence to Commissioner Cormack. The man looked at her with a dry smile, the kind that smells of stale tobacco and rotten power. An unauthorized recording from a student? He said without even glancing at the content. That can't be used in a proper trial. It may not be used, Clara replied, but it can open an investigation. Or it could get us all into trouble, don't you see? Behind him, the flag of Spain hung with the lasmaggies of someone who had witnessed too many lies. Cormac stood, walked to the window, and with a slow gesture, placed the card into a drawer. This case is already closed. The boy fell. There's no evidence to the contrary. Commissioner, what if it were your grandson? Clara's voice cracked a little, but it didn't break. My grandson wouldn't be out at night, nor would he have a mother like that. When Grace returned to the office that night, the file was gone. Deleted. Everything. As if it had never existed. No email, no record. Only the electronic silence of someone who knows how to erase traces. Eli Whitaker didn't know, but that night he dreamed of the camera. In his dream, he stood in front of the lens. He didn't speak. He didn't point. He just breathed. And next to him, Remus. He didn't bark. He only looked at him, as if waiting for the world to understand without needing a sound. Delilah slept peacefully in her rented house on the outskirts of town. She dreamed of grapes, of new dresses, of things bought with others' silence, until a dull noise woke her. It was the hoarse voice of her grandmother, Agnes Crowley, emerging from nowhere like the echo of a punishment. He who hides carries. And sooner or later his back breaks. Delilah sat up in bed. She was sweating. She looked down. Her nails were filled with dirt. She didn't remember going outside. 2 days later, during a conversation with Clara, Eli Whitaker took a blank sheet of paper. He didn't speak. He didn't cry. He just drew a black rectangle. Inside it, a faceless woman figure. Beside her, a dog with a torn ear. Clara understood immediately. The camera? She asked. Eli Whitaker didn't answer. But he pushed the paper toward her, like someone handing over a truth that never fully belonged to them. In the village, Miss Ida May, the old woman who used to care for Remus before the dog chose, Eli Whitaker was picking lemons from her garden when she saw Grace walk by. "Everything all right, child?" she asked with that raspy voice only old women can make sound sweet. "They erased what I saw," Grace replied. "Then write down what you remember. Will it help?" "It will help you." Grace cried for a while silently. Remus from the porch barely lifted his head and then lowered it again, as if he knew that sometimes the evidence disappears, but the scars remain. That afternoon, in the town square, a group of children played at being judges and witnesses. One of them, Maisie, wore a drawing hanging around her neck. It showed a long-haired woman pushing something to the ground. "Who is she?" a tourist asked. The girl didn't respond, but she lifted her chin as if to say, "The one no one wants to see." Clara walked alone down the alley that led to the park. Each step felt like it landed on the conscience of the entire town. When she reached the bench where Eli Whitaker used to sit with Remus, she found it empty. But carved into the wood, in trembling letters, was a phrase, "Even if there's no video, there is memory." And next to the phrase, a small dog's paw print. Like a witness, like an act of faith. No one knew the exact moment he disappeared. Only that at dawn, in front of Los Alamos Hospital, the blanket where Remus used to sleep had been folded with a precision that did not belong to any child. There was no fur, no smell, not even a single footprint, only absence. And a cut chain hanging from the iron bench like a sorrowful rope. Clara came running. "Where's the dog?" she asked the nurse. A woman came with a document from the town hall. Said the dog was dangerous, that he was hers. Clara said nothing. She just crouched down, picked up the still warm chain, and held it between her fingers as if stroking a fresh memory. She didn't cry. Women like her no longer cried. They simply recorded each injustice in silence, like unsettled debts of the soul. Remus didn't understand where they were taking him, but he recognized her smell. Delilah with her Swedish perfume and her serpent's voice, slithering easily among adults but never able to fool a dog. She shoved him into the trunk without looking at him. "I'll silence you too, you bastard." The road was long. Remus didn't whimper. He just breathed deeply, trying to memorize every curve, every jolt of the car. He had no words, but he knew how to store roots the way others stored secrets. They left him on an abandoned farm on the outskirts of Velaverde. Agnes Crowley, Delilah's grandmother, was waiting for him in the shade of the lemon tree. "Don't give him water today. Let him feel what it's like to be alone." They tied him up with a thick, rusty rope. They fastened it to an empty oil barrel. Remus didn't resist. He just lay down on the dry earth and closed his eyes, but his ears stayed alert. That night there was a yellow moon, and the crickets seemed to laugh. From the corral came the screech of an old rooster and the crack of dry branches. Mercedes came out every hour to check if he was still there. Remus didn't bark. He didn't growl. He just stared, and that made her nervous. "You should be howling, damn you, like all the others." But he wasn't the others. He was Remus, and he knew how to wait. On the second day, Eli Whitaker asked about him. It was the first time he had spoken since the attack. "Where is Remus?" Clara looked at him. Something broke in her voice. "He left, sweetheart. He'll come back." Eli Whitaker shook his head. "He doesn't leave. He doesn't leave." In Velaverde, Remus heard a different sound. It wasn't birdsong. It was ... metal. A padlock not properly closed. A rusty hinge that cried every time the wind blew. He waited until dusk. When Mercedes went into the kitchen to prepare her anise tea, when the village dogs slept, when the world believed nothing else would happen that night, Remus stood up. He didn't run. He walked. He pulled the rope until the knot burned his neck. He pushed the barrel until it fell with a crash that startled the hens, and then he ran. They saw him at the edge of the highway, with dried blood on his back and mud on his paws. A young truck driver swerved and braked. "Hey, are you all right, buddy?" Remus didn't stop. He had a clear destination. The hospital, the blanket, the voice of a child who wasn't shouting, but calling him with every heartbeat. He arrived. At dawn, Clara was at the door, holding a cold cup of coffee in her hands. When she saw him, the cup dropped. "Remus!" The dog approached, slowly, broken. He lay down at her feet. She crouched down, touched his head. "Who did this to you?" Remus looked at her. And then, for the first time since Eli Whitaker had been hurt, Clara cried. Eli Whitaker was asleep, dreaming of a field without screens. Remus entered without asking permission. He climbed onto the bed, curled up next to the boy. The child, without opening his eyes, smiled. "Told you you wouldn't leave." Outside, the sun rose like a slow forgiveness. And in some corner of Velaverde, Agnes Crowley woke to an unusual silence. She went out to the yard. She saw the broken rope, and she knew. Evil doesn't always scream, but loyalty ... doesn't need to either. The silence in the room was thick, as if the air were waiting for someone to break it with something more than a sigh. Eli Whitaker sat in the corner, his feet dangling from a chair too tall for his size. He wore the same white shirt he used to wear on Sundays at the orphanage, but his dark eyes met no one's gaze. He held his notebook tightly against his chest. Like an invisible shield, Remus entered first. They hadn't called him by name. There was no legal reason for him to be there. But when the side door opened, the canine dog crossed the room with a steady gait. Without barking, without looking at anyone, he simply walked up to Eli Whitaker and sat beside him. The boy, without lifting his eyes from the ground, released one hand from the notebook and let it drop, just barely brushing the dog's warm, worn back. Crowley Clara watched from the back of the room. Her heart, so often hardened by bureaucracy, now beat with the fragile tenderness of someone witnessing something that must not be broken. "We called Delilah Knox," said the judge. Delilah walked forward confidently, as if the floor belonged to her. Her blood-red dress contrasted sharply with the flawless pallor of her face. As she passed Eli Whitaker, she smiled. No one else noticed. But Remus did. A low, almost inaudible growl rose from his throat. "I've always cared for that boy as if he were my own," she began. "People see what they want to see. What they don't understand is that raising a damaged child isn't easy. He lies, he hurts himself on purpose, he craves attention." Eli Whitaker didn't move. He didn't cry. But his fist clenched tightly around the corner of the notebook. There are people who want to make a dog the judge and a traumatized child the witness. It's absurd. Delilah snapped, her voice trembling with contained rage. The judge didn't respond. He simply nodded at Clara. She approached Eli Whitaker, knelt gently, and whispered, "Only if you want to." The boy looked at her for the first time. Then, slowly, he placed the notebook on the court table and opened it. He didn't say a word. He simply turned the pages one by one. The first showed a house without windows. At the door, a female figure, holding a rope. The second, a boy with closed eyes, locked inside a refrigerator. The third, a one-eyed dog, its legs spread like a shield in front of the boy. The judge leaned forward. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. Eli Whitaker turned to the final page. There, drawn in slow but firm strokes, was Remus lying next to the boy, surrounded by white flowers. Above their heads, a single word written in trembling letters: "Home." "Is that notebook yours, Eli Whitaker?" asked the judge. The boy nodded. "Did you draw it?" Eli Whitaker looked up for the first time and met Delilah's eyes. His voice came out as a whisper, but each syllable cut through the air like glass. "Remus saved me. She let me die." Delilah took a step back. For a moment, her mask cracked. She was no longer the offended mother, the strong woman. She was only a shadow trapped between four walls and too many broken silences. From the audience, a girl stood up. Her hair was in braids, and she held a doll dangling from one arm. "I lived with her before Eli Whitaker," said Maisie. "She made me sleep in the bathroom. One time she cut my hair because I didn't clean my plate." 2 more voices followed. Then 5, 10, all children. All small, all with the truth stuck in their throats for far too long. Delilah screamed, but no one heard her anymore. The judge closed the case file. His fingers trembled slightly as he wrote the final line. "Guilty." Eli Whitaker stepped down from the chair. Remus rose with him. They didn't run. They didn't celebrate. They simply walked together toward the door, as if that act walking without fear were the greatest victory of all. Clara caught up with them in the hallway. She knelt beside the boy. "Are you okay?" Eli Whitaker looked at the dog, then at her. He smiled faintly. "Now I am." And for the first time in weeks, he extended his hand. Not to protect himself, not to ask for help. He extended it toward the future. Remus licked his palm slowly. as though blessing something sacred. Evening fell over the town. In the plaza in front of the courthouse, the first cempasúchil flowers were beginning to bloom. The Day of the Dead was approaching, but here, in this moment, what was being born was not memory, but possibility. The possibility of a new home. The possibility that a dog and a child, both broken, might rebuild themselves together. And in the orange sky, the church bells did not toll in mourning. They rang for justice, for love, for truth. The courtroom was full, but no one breathed. Eli Whitaker stood, small as a forgotten candle in an empty church. He clutched a piece of paper folded in quarters. He didn't speak. He hadn't since the night his mother left him bleeding among the branches of the abandoned park. Beside him, Remus, the dog, wore no leash, but no one dared to touch him. One ear drooped. His back was marked with scars that spoke of wars without medals. His eyes, one clouded, the other burning, stared unblinking at the woman in red seated in the wood. Second row, Delilah Knox. That proves nothing, Delilah said, her voice firm, crossing her legs with a sharp snap. A drawing is not testimony, a dog is not a judge, and a mute child cannot accuse. No one responded. But in the second row, a girl with black braids stood up. Her shoes were worn, and her eyes were too large for her face. I saw what she did too, the girl said. Her voice was clear, though it trembled slightly. She hit me with a branch. She said it was to drive the demon out of me. The judge blinked. Delilah didn't even turn. And who are you? She asked with disdain. Rose, the girl replied. You had me before, Eli Whitaker. You made me sleep on the floor. You taped my mouth shut when I cried. Remus made a low sound, as if he recognized the name. Lies, said Delilah, smiling with clenched teeth. Crazy girl. Orphan fantasies, looking for attention. Eli Whitaker didn't move. He slowly unfolded the paper in his hands. It was a drawing, done in wax crayons. A woman in a red dress raising a stick. In front of her, a child on the ground. Between them, a dog standing, baring its fangs. A murmur swept through the courtroom. Delilah shrank back for the first time. Who taught you to draw that? She asked, her voice lower now. Eli Whitaker looked at her, first in the eyes, then at her neck, and finally he lowered his gaze. His lips moved just barely. The word was not heard. But Clara, sitting among the audience, knew what he said. She read it in the air, Remus. The next to rise was Maisie, a girl from the shelter. She took an identical drawing from her backpack. Then Noah, and then Toby Lane. Each one, silently, walked to the stand and placed their sheet on the table. Different colors, different hands, but always the same scene. The red woman, the stick, the boy, and the dog. This is a circus, Delilah spat, now standing, her makeup trembling on her cheeks. They're children. They don't know what they're saying. They're weak, manipulable, Remus growled. It wasn't a bark. It was a low, deep sound, as if it had risen from the bowels of the earth. His paws dug into the ground, his body rigid like a statue. He didn't leap. He didn't attack. He only looked at Delilah, and that was enough. She stepped back half a pace. Delilah Knox, who had shouted in courtrooms, in churches, in shelters, now said nothing. You told me that if I talked, they'd kill me like they did my dad. Eli Whitaker said, very slowly, in a hoarse voice, as though it came from deep within his chest. The whole courtroom turned to him. It was the first time he had spoken in months. You left me in the park, you kicked me, you spat on me. And then you walked away. Delilah let out a fractured sigh, like glass breaking. She didn't deny it. She didn't scream. She had no more words. Eli Whitaker stepped down from the stand, walked to Remus, and knelt beside him. He wrapped his arms around the dog's neck. Remus led him, closing his eyes. A page slipped from the pile of drawings. On it, there were only two figures, A small boy and a dog sitting beneath a tree. There was no blood. No red, only peace. This drawing is new, Clara whispered. He made it this morning. Remus turned his head toward her, as if he understood. As if, at last, something in his world had been repaired just enough to rest. The judge did not raise his voice. He simply wrote. The words, like feathers, fell softly but with weight. Guilty. As charged, there was no applause, only silence. A different kind of silence, one that no longer hurt. One that, finally, made room for children to breathe. The air in the courtroom was thick, like broth made from old bones. The walls seemed to hold the whispers of ancient trials, of broken promises, of names that should never have been forgotten. Outside, the sky over Zamora had turned ashen, as if the dead were paying attention. Eli Whitaker sat on the farthest bench, his small body wrapped in the gray jacket Clara had lent him. His large, dark eyes stared fixedly at the worn wooden floor. No one forced him to speak. There was no need. Remus entered silently, the way only an old dog knows how. He didn't bark. He didn't run. He walked straight to the boy's feet, lay down and rested his muzzle on his paws, as if the earth didn't deserve his gaze. There were scars on his back that no longer hurt, and others, deeper ones, that only he and God knew. Delilah looked at him with a mixture of contempt and fear. She wore broken white, as if she could deceive the blind eyes of the law, but not those of a dog. That animal is trained, she said, her voice cold like a healer's needle. He was trained to hate, to attack. He doesn't know what he sees, he just reacts. Clara remained standing. Her hair was pinned up with a copper clip, her heart hanging by an invisible thread. Maybe he doesn't speak, but he remembers, like Eli Whitaker. Like Rose, like all those you tried to erase. The judge said nothing. He watched Eli Whitaker, not with the eyes of authority, but like a grandfather who has lost a grandson and could do nothing to stop it. Eli Whitaker looked up. His eyes held no anger, no fear. Only a quiet, ancient sadness, like that of children who no longer expect anything from anyone. Remus stood up, slowly. He took 3 steps, stopped in front of Delilah. He didn't growl. He didn't wag his tail. He looked at her. And in that silence, more than in any testimony, something broke. You can't use a dog to accuse me, Delilah spat. This is a farce. I took care of him when no one else wanted to. Then, Eli Whitaker spoke for the first time in weeks. His voice was barely a whisper, as if air itself was too heavy in his throat. You didn't take care of me. You hid me. You shut me down. The room froze. Clara closed her eyes, and a tear slid down her cheek like a promise fulfilled. When? You locked me in the freezer. The boy continued, trembling. You thought I wouldn't remember. But the cold never forgets. Remus approached him, touched him gently with his snout. Eli Whitaker petted him without looking. He was there. He found me. Not because someone told him what to do, but because he knew I didn't want to die. The judge brought a hand to his chest, perhaps to contain something, perhaps to shield himself from himself. That's enough, he said at last. Enough. He didn't raise his voice, but no one dared to contradict him. The verdict wasn't read aloud. There was no need. The sentence had already been written in every one of Eli Whitaker's drawings, in each of Rose's silences, in every night Remus had slept at the feet of a boy who didn't know how to pray. When it was all over, Eli Whitaker walked out of the courtroom in small steps, as if the ground still hurt. Clara followed behind him, without touching. She knew some wounds need space to heal. Remus stopped at the edge of the steps. He lifted his head to the sky, barked once. And it wasn't a bark of triumph. It was one of those barks that carry names. Names no one says anymore, but that live in the cracks of the world. That same evening, Eli Whitaker drew. On a piece of paper folded in 4, with a pencil that smelled of old wood, a one-eyed dog, a boy with no mouth, and a woman with arms hanging, as if the weight of her lie had finally defeated her. He taped it to his bedroom door, not to remember the pain, but to not forget he had been seen. That night, Remus slept at the foot of his bed. He didn't move. He didn't dream. He only breathed, as if that breath was the only thing keeping the world alive. And for the first time since that day in the park, Eli Whitaker slept without clenching his fists. The river sounded different that morning. It wasn't the muddy roar of months ago, when it had nearly swallowed the boy lying among branches and trash. Today, the water seemed to speak in a low voice, like someone praying without moving. Eli Whitaker listened to that murmur with his forehead resting on Remus's warm back. He said nothing, he rarely did, but his breathing had changed. It was no longer the breath of a child waiting for a blow. Remus, lying beside him, perked up his ears from time to time as if he were still on duty. Although his eyes had clouded with age, he could still smell emotions like others smell toasted bread. And that day, he smelled calm. Damp earth without blood, skin without fear. "Do you remember?" Eli Whitaker asked, barely moving his lips. Remus didn't answer, but his tail wagged. That was enough. "You left me alive here." Eli Whitaker was 12 now. His hair was longer, his hands still small but strong. He no longer slept with the light on. He no longer wet the bed. Sometimes he spoke of dreams, sometimes he laughed. And still, every 1st of November, he returned to the river. He brought marigold flowers, one for every scream he couldn't let out, one for every night Delilah dug her fingers into his arms like someone twisting a lie, one for every child who could never escape, and one, always one, for Remus, not because the dog was dead. Not yet, but because there were parts of him that had died that night. Eli Whitaker looked at the cross stuck in the ground. It was small, made of light wood, with no name. It bore only one phrase written in the trembling hand of a child. "Here." Someone barked when all others stayed silent. "Dad didn't know, did he?" he whispered. Remus tilted his head as if the memory weighed on him too. He didn't want to know either. Nor did Father Graves, or Senora Mercedes, or that soft-voiced policeman. They all had ears, and all of them shut them. The wind kicked up a bit of dust. The flowers danced. Remus sneezed. Eli Whitaker stroked behind his ears, where the fur was the softest. "But you heard me, without words. Without me asking for help." A long silence, peaceful. Behind them, Clara watched from a distance. She had aged. Her hair grayer, her skin more lined, but her gaze remained unchanged. Sometimes, she wondered if what they did truly helped. If the world changed when even one child was saved. Or if it simply hurt less. Eli Whitaker stood up and walked over to her. "Can I take him home? He's tired." She nodded. She never asked why or what for. Remus walked slowly, his legs a little clumsy, but with that dignity of those who never betrayed themselves. At his side, the boy, not so much a boy anymore, held the leash as if carrying a fragile treasure. They crossed the bridge together, the same one where Eli Whitaker had nearly ceased to exist. No one remembered it anymore. The municipality had said they'd close it, that they'd tear it down. They never did. Maybe, deep down, they knew something important had happened there. On the other side, the street was still broken. The houses, just as humble. But in Miss Ida May's window, white ribbons hung. In the schoolyard, someone had painted a mural, a boy hugging a dog in front of an open door. Eli Whitaker didn't look back. He didn't need to. He simply said, without raising his voice, "Today, I forgive you." Clara turned. "Who?" Eli Whitaker didn't answer. He knelt, pressed his forehead to Remus's, and closed his eyes. Maybe he forgave his mother for staying silent, or the priest for not protecting him, or himself for being afraid for so long. Maybe he forgave no one. But there was peace. At night, when the sun had set and the lit candles shone on the altars, Remus slept at the foot of the bed. He breathed with effort, but without pain. From his pillow, Eli Whitaker looked at him tenderly. "Thank you," he said, "for staying." And though the dog didn't move a single muscle, a tear fell from his good eye. No one spoke again that night. But the house, for the first time in many years, held no fear in its walls, no screams in the corners, only the gentle sound of a river, another river that still knew how to tell stories. If you've made it this far, I want you to know something. This story wasn't written just for Eli Whitaker, nor for Remus, not even for the echo of forgotten children. This story was written for you. Yes, for you, woman with hands lined like maps, who once held an entire family together without letting go of your own self. For you who maybe raised children alone, or lost someone without the space to scream. For you who learned to smile with the wound still open, because there was no time to cry. You know better than anyone what it means to stay silent for love, for fear, for dignity. You know better than anyone how often justice doesn't arrive on time, and how often it comes in the form of silence, a glance, or a dog that stays. You know that there are wounds no law can heal, but tenderness can, and memory, and a story well told. What is the value of this story? More than a narrative or a trial won, it is a reminder that broken souls are not alone if someone names them, that a dog can see what no one else dares to look at, that small acts of love, staying, protecting, believing can weigh more than any legal sentence. Eli Whitaker survived, but beyond his body, something even more sacred was saved, his trust in the world. That wasn't done by the state. It was done by an old animal, by a persistent woman, by a group of children who dared to draw what all the adults denied. How many times were you like Remus too? You stayed when others left. You held on when no one saw you. You kept memories. You smelled pain. You were a silent witness and also a guardian. Do you remember yourself that way? Because we do. This story, in truth, is a mirror. Not the kind that reflects wrinkles or gray hair, but the kind that reflects the strength you sometimes forget you have. We want to tell you, your tenderness is revolutionary. Your memory has value. Your stories, even the ones you haven't told, hold up the world. And if you ever thought you didn't matter anymore, that your time to change something had passed, allow us with respect to disagree. Because every time you read a story like this, and you hold it, and you share it, you're doing something immense. You are saying, I see in a world that so often closes its eyes. You are saying, I believe in kindness, in redemption, in the power of staying beside someone in pain. And that changes the world more than you think. What if this story weren't fiction? In many places around the world, including your own neighborhood, there are children who don't dare to speak. There are women who cannot leave. There are dogs who understand more than humans allow. And there is you, with your heart ready, with your experience as a lantern. We ask you something. If you ever saw something that unsettled you, don't stay silent. If you ever witnessed an injustice, don't diminish your voice. If you were ever a victim, don't believe it was your fault. And if you ever had a Remus in your life, that being who saved you without words, don't forget to thank them on your personal altar. One final thought, dear reader of 65, 70, 80 years. There are many stories that only you can tell. Stories that aren't in books or TV series. Stories of quiet resilience, of true love, of losses that taught lessons, of victories that no one applauded. Don't hide them, because there is a granddaughter waiting to listen, a neighbor who needs your wisdom, a world that needs your calm strength. And there is a promise written between the Almagi of this story. Those who love unconditionally leave marks that not even time can erase. Remus never spoke, but his loyalty taught a child to trust again. And you, even without barking, have also been a guide to many. Thank you for reading. Thank you for staying. Thank you for being one of those who never leave. With all the respect in the world, a storyteller who still believes in the human heart.